to our friends who are beginning their study of sign language. While there are many ways to communicate with deaf people, sign language is the most important and most common of them all. Because of this, as you use sign language in conversation with deaf people, there are a few principles which you should take note of. You probably already know many of these principles. For example, you have to face a deaf person while signing to him and make sure that he is watching you, otherwise you might as well be talking to yourself rather than communicating with him. Yet there are also a few situations that you need to be especially careful about. For example, some deaf people speak at the same time as they're signing to someone, and in such a situation a hearing person, although he may well be paying close attention to the deaf person's words, can easily be influenced by his regular communication habits with hearing people and allow his eye gaze to shift to some other place, making the deaf person feel that he's suddenly being ignored. Therefore, common courtesy demands that you maintain eye contact with a deaf person until he is finished talking, whether he is using only sign language, only speech, or a combination of both signs and speech. Another principle which you must pay close attention to has to do with your attitude. Putting it simply, don't put on an attitude of superiority. In spite of the fact that many deaf people may be limited in their ability to comprehend spoken language, their character and intelligence are generally not handicapped at all. The easiest way to make a deaf person unhappy is to treat him with a condescending attitude. Actually, a deaf person feels just as insulted as a hearing person would if treated this way. But very few hearing people on their first contact with a deaf person would think of this. Occasionally, an otherwise very polite hearing person might very well unthinkingly speak to a deaf person in words which he would never use towards another hearing person, without realizing the hurt that he may have inflicted on the deaf person. Things like this happen very often. For example, forcing a deaf person who is totally capable of caring for himself to accept unasked for assistance. Another example might be when two hearing people and a deaf person are together, and the two hearing people start speaking orally about the deaf person without a thought for his feelings, to the extent of merely regarding him as some object for discussion. Probably the worst situation is when a hearing person and a deaf person are talking together, and along comes another hearing person who very rudely interrupts their conversation and not only fails to apologize for this impolite behavior, but even starts up a long, detailed oral conversation with the first hearing person, casting the deaf person off to the side. Regardless of whether such behavior is intentional or not, it will not fail to cause the deaf person to feel that he has been insulted. What's wrong? Aren't I important or intelligent enough to be included in this conversation? Imagine a situation where you are not very fluent in a foreign language, but there you are in a foreign country chatting away in Mandarin with a foreign friend whose Mandarin is quite good. Then suddenly along comes another foreigner who can also speak Mandarin, who suddenly latches onto your friend and has a long, detailed conversation with him in the foreign language, in complete disregard for your feelings. In such a similar situation, you can get some ideas of how a deaf person might feel. In all honesty, sometimes deaf people also make the same kind of mistakes described above, especially those who can speak as well as sign. When he is communicating with a hearing friend who doesn't know sign language too well, and along comes a deaf friend, he may also forget and drop the hearing person and start talking in sign with the deaf friend who just came. But there is one difference. Usually, in such a situation, a hearing person is less likely to get the feeling of being insulted. He's also more likely to ask his deaf friend to tell him what they had just been talking about. One reason for this is that hearing people make up the majority in society. Another is that hearing people in their everyday lives rarely encounter blocks to language communication. Someday, when your sign language is very fluent, If you're talking orally with another friend who is also good at sign language in front of a deaf person, it will make the deaf person feel very uncomfortable and strange, and if this happens frequently, you may discover that he will become unwilling to forgive you of it. Even if the deaf person that you're talking to is a complete bore as a conversation partner, you must first apologize and offer some excuse before slipping away, just like you would with a hearing person. From the above-mentioned situations, we can summarize a few basic principles. 1. When communicating with a deaf person, you must keep your face and hands towards him. 2. Focus your attention on your partner's eyes. Perhaps, if you're just starting your study of sign language, you'll find this hard to do, but it is very important. Since he is watching you when you and he are communicating, he hopes that you will watch him also, whether he is using speech or signs. 3. Don't cover your face or your mouth with your hands while talking. Don't discuss a deaf person orally in his presence, whether he is an adult or a child. If you have something private that you wish to discuss with another hearing person, you should go someplace else to talk. 4. When you're communicating with the deaf person, you should try as hard as possible to finish your conversation and not just break it off when you feel like it. If by chance you are interrupted or you have to leave, remember that you should excuse yourself first before leaving. 5. When you are talking with a hearing friend, don't forget to allow any deaf friends who might be present to join in the conversation, and not forget and cast them to one side. If you know sign language, then make sure you're signing, and in doing so you'll very probably remind your hearing friend to do the same. If he doesn't know sign language, you should try to translate what he says into sign language for your deaf friends and allow everyone to have a good time conversing. 6. By all means, don't regard your deaf friend as a 3-year-old child or an idiot. Perhaps his limited speech ability makes it difficult for him to quickly demonstrate his intelligence, but he may be even more intelligent than you. So, if you take him for an idiot, you'll discover that inside he might be regarding you as one. Therefore, you should treat him with respect and politeness, just as you would an average hearing person. In addition, there are also a few technical guidelines which have to do with the use of sign language and common knowledge about hearing impairment. These include: 1. When you wish to get a deaf person's attention, the best way is to tap him lightly on the shoulder or arm. If the floor that you're standing on is one that would allow a deaf person to feel vibrations, then you can tap your foot on the floor to attract his attention. You may also knock lightly on a table, but such movements should not be too strong so as not to suddenly scare someone out of his wits. Another good method can be used in group gatherings, that being quickly turning the lights off and on again to get everyone's attention. Note also that people who like to tap their fingers on a table when they're bored, people who like to rock one leg on the other or keep time to music by tapping their feet on the floor, or people who are often changing seats or changing their position while sitting, rarely fail to annoy deaf people who are in conversation by diverting their attention. Besides this, when you are talking with a deaf person, you should avoid as much as possible any large or heavy movements so as not to create any uncalled for distractions for other deaf people. 2. Except for people who are left-handed, or in certain signs which especially require the use of the left hand, most signs are made with the right hand as the dominant hand. If a sign requires the simultaneous use of both hands, then the right hand should be the one that performs the greater number or the larger of the movements. Up to this point, we have been discussing several principles which you should pay close attention to. Now we would like to offer you a few hints on how to learn sign language and other related information which can help you in your study of sign language and which will allow you to become aware of some of its wonders. Beginners of sign language often feel confused at the way things are expressed in sign language. Sometimes a particular sign might refer to 3, 8, or even as many as 9 different meanings. For example, the sign willing can at the same time refer to agree to, approve, to okay, to pass, acknowledge, confess, affirm, permit, and allow, as well as willing. On the other hand, occasionally a single word in Chinese may be expressed in sign language by several different signs. For example, the different signs used for the character 对, meaning right, variously correspond to its different meanings in such expressions as you said that right, I say that to you, so-and-so lives across the street, couplet, proofread, sorry, treat, deal with, dialogue, and unmatchable. Sometimes a single sign, when modified by a change of facial expression, the degree of exaggeration of the size of a sign, or the speed of a sign, can get a particular feeling or emotion across much more easily than written or spoken language. For example, the signed utterance, "What are you doing?" when modified by the above-mentioned factors, can express such varied meanings as, "What in the heck are you up to?" "What do you usually do?" "What are you doing right now?" Or, "Hey, what are you up to over there?" For a moment, let's take only the sign ask, and by adding changes of facial expression, enlargement of the sign, or different speeds in making the sign, let's try to express the various situations listed below. You'll be discovering some of the wonders of sign language. 1. The teacher asks every student in the class. 2. Every student in the class asks the teacher. 3. The teacher takes turns asking students seated to his right and left. 4. A person asks his landlord who lives upstairs. 5. The wife asks her husband, who has just returned home, what he has hidden behind his back. 6. A policeman asks a suspect who has just been brought in. 7. The parents ask their child why he didn't pass his monthly exam. 8. A crying child asks the policeman, "Where is my mommy?" 9. The wife asks her husband where the lipstick on his shirt came from. 10. A man asks a woman if she wants to marry him. From these sample sentences, it is not difficult for us to see that facial expression, body movements, and the speed and size of the signs plays an important role in conveying feelings through sign language. We can even say that these factors correspond to the pauses, junctures, changes of speed, and intonation of spoken languages. Without such changes, imagine how flat and monotonous spoken language would be. For the same reasons, we can come to understand how important emphasis on facial expression and the speed of signs is in sign language. These factors give sign language its vitality and life. But please remember that such expressions must not be overdone, but rather expressed appropriately and subtly. There is one other thing which you should keep in mind. Sign language varies from place to place, just like various locations have different dialects. Whenever you run into such situations, don't get excited. You don't have to be able to understand every single sign. As long as you are able to catch the main ideas from those signs that you do recognize, and can add a little bit of reasoning and context, you can get the general meaning of what the other person is saying. In this way, the varying signs used in different areas will no longer be a stumbling block to you. Your sign language teacher will try his best to teach you all of the variant forms of the signs as they exist in each area, so that you will recognize them when you see them. But in general, your teacher will only require you to use those signs which he himself usually uses. Moreover, we must realize that although a user of sign language can choose the signs that he himself likes to use, he has no way to anticipate which signs his conversational partner will use. As a result, it would be well for you to continually add to your ability in sign language so as to be able to understand all the variant ways of making a sign. The signs which are being taught in our sign language training classes can be said to be a synthesis of the signs used in the 3 schools for the deaf in Taiwan. Since most deaf high school students come to live in Taipei following graduation, regular contact has subconsciously created a kind of survival of the fittest type of sign elimination process, leading to a fairly unified method of expression. So the signs which are taught in our classes are essentially this lingua franca of signed communication. We will, however, try our best to note the numerous variations in the signs for the benefit of our students. As you begin communicating with deaf people, don't get discouraged if you can't immediately understand what they're signing. This is a very natural phenomenon. For a beginner, the ability to read and understand sign language is at first rather difficult to attain. Developing this ability is the hardest part about learning sign language. As a result, your sign language teacher will occasionally give you visual tests and will encourage you to use sign language as much as you can in communicating with one another. After a period of time of doing this, you will gradually become more and more able to read and understand the signs that your deaf friends are signing to you. But to be able to understand the flying fingers of a conversation between 2 deaf people, it will still take you quite a long period of time. There is one more important thing. You have to practice a lot at home. Although your teacher can guide you and increase your ability to understand sign language, can demonstrate as he introduces each new sign to you, can teach you how to make your signing more accurate and correct your mistakes, can teach you how to use sign language to express various different emotions, and can provide lots of opportunities in the classroom for you to be exposed to all sorts of different signs, he has no way of practicing sign language for you. In order to be able to freely use all the signs that you have learned previously, you have to depend upon yourself to do the necessary practicing. You should practice each sign as much as possible, and even think up 10 to 20 practice sentences or phrases to practice each basic sign. Only in this way will you be able to memorize them for good. If you often practice like this and continue to expose yourself to new signs, you will soon discover that you have almost begun to think of sign language as your mother tongue. When you get to this point, it means that you have finished being just a beginner at sign language and are starting to develop fluent, beautiful, and ever more fascinating sign language skills. Let these skills grow and you will enter a moving, interesting, beautiful, and flowing realm of communication. Finally, a warm welcome to our sign language classes, and may your fingers blossom with flowers.